All right, let's just jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really wild collision of ideas. What happens when you take 2,500-year-old Buddhist philosophy and drop it right into the gritty, life-or-death reality of peer-led addiction recovery? Specifically, we're critically examining how ancient concepts, like egolessness, are being integrated into modern, highly structured rehab programs like moral recognition therapy, or MRT. For a little context, MRT is this heavily structured, cognitive behavioral framework used a ton in the justice system to help people reshape their moral reasoning. So what exactly happens when deep, abstract contemplation smashes into a rigorous behavioral framework? Let's find out.
So this brings up a super provocative, kind of counterintuitive question. Is it actually possible to be quote-unquote too smart for your own recovery? Sounds totally backward, right? But just imagine someone who can perfectly analyze their own trauma. They can vividly quote psychology textbooks to you, and they can articulate every single one of their emotional triggers. But they still can't stop their own self-destructive habits. Our source material highlights this exact unique challenge. How do highly intelligent trauma survivors use these complex, abstract ideas to completely hide from doing the real, messy, ground-level emotional work?
To really get this, we have to start with the baseline of addiction and incarceration, which is often described as the mental prison. The material defines this as a recursively self-sealing belief system. What does that mean in plain English? Well, it means your brain essentially builds a fortress out of your trauma. And then every new piece of information you encounter is instantly twisted to prove that yes, the fortress is absolutely necessary. In this state, your ego acts like an armored knight. It traps you in this mental prison of blame and profound self-loathing, completely narrowing down what actually feels possible or even safe in your daily life. Okay, so this is where the Buddhist concept of anatta enters the picture. It translates directly to non-self or egolessness. Now here is the absolutely crucial distinction. This does not mean you physically disappear. It doesn't mean you don't have a personality or that your personal history doesn't matter. Not at all. It just suggests that you don't have to spend every ounce of your psychological energy defending a permanent fixed identity. In this framework, happiness is found by just letting go of those rigid egocentric needs and realizing, hey, I'm a continually changing process.
Think about how absolutely exhausting it is to constantly defend this narrative of being a failure or an addict or having this damaged ego that perpetually needs fixing. It's like dragging around a massive, heavy shield all day long. But dropping that shield allows individuals in recovery to adopt what's called the empty vessel stance. Instead of being rigidly packed full of old resentments and defensive maneuvers, you become this open, fluid space, a mind that's actually ready to be filled with entirely new perspectives.
So when you integrate anatta, the therapeutic benefits are actually pretty massive. When you stop treating your existing beliefs as these deep, unfixable moral failures, and instead just see them as, outdated survival tools, something amazing happens. You begin to cut down on those crippling shame spirals. You start to loosen the grip of those high-precision trauma defenses. But most importantly, all of that mental energy you used to waste defending a fragile identity, it's completely freed up. You literally finally have the energy to heal.
But, and this is a massive but, there is a real peril in mixing high-level philosophy with recovery. And it's captured just perfectly in this quote from our sources. It says, "You have built a cathedral out of your own resistance. When you use frameworks to explain your self-sabotage, you are essentially performing a high-level form of intellectual bypass." I mean, let that sink in for a second. Highly cognitive people often use the idea of no self to hyper-analyze their problems. They build this beautiful, intricate intellectual house, but they lock themselves right in the basement, totally untouched by the actual emotional pain.
This whole dynamic creates what the material calls the intellectual armor trap. Basically, highly intelligent people use sophisticated metacognitive defense, which is really just a fancy way of saying thinking about thinking, to create a sterile, safe distance from raw emotions. Concepts like ego dissolution act as a super convenient intellectual exit ramp. It's a way for the smart person in the room to completely avoid the messy vulnerability of genuine recovery by just hiding out in the clouds of systems thinking. They pre-facilitate their own therapy so nobody can ever actually reach them.
And this intellectualizing leads right into a really dangerous facilitation hurdle called the register translation problem. Just imagine a highly intellectual participant casually talking about decreation or dying to the self in a literal peer recovery room. To a facilitator, that doesn't sound like enlightenment. It sounds exactly like a clinical crisis or active suicidality. It triggers immediate panic. So these philosophical concepts must be meticulously translated into safe pro-social language. Die becomes letting go of self-importance. Emptiness becomes freedom from clinging. This translation is absolutely vital to bridge the gap between deep contemplation and actual group safety.
Of course, bringing this kind of philosophy into structured behavioral therapy raises a giant, glaring objection, especially in programs focused on accountability. It's the elephant in the room. If there is no self, well, who's responsible? If the ego is just an illusion, who exactly takes the blame for past mistakes or crimes, or the profound harm caused to other people? Well, the answer we find in the sources is actually incredibly empowering. Dropping that rigid self-view doesn't destroy accountability, it actually supercharges it. Because you no longer have to waste all your energy projecting this fake, perfect image, you're finally free to just say, yep, my bad, and make authentic repairs. It acknowledges that the self is a fluid process. It's not a permanently broken object. This shift pulls your focus completely away from just managing your reputation and moves you into genuine ethical action. It literally takes you out of the passenger seat of your trauma and puts you right back in the driver's seat.
Now, here's the biological reality check. None of this brilliant philosophical integration works if your nervous system is screaming that you're in danger. The sources describe this neuromechanistic concept called the precision gate. When your brain is under high shame or threat, which is, incredibly common in early recovery, its ability to take in new data and update its map of the world narrows drastically. It literally locks the gate to protect the overloaded system. It's going to treat any new cognitive approach of philosophical idea as a threat to be rejected outright.
So how do we actually get past this biological gate? Well, somatic regulation has to come first. Literally, you cannot think your way out of a survival state. If your body firmly believes a tiger is chasing you, it does not care about Buddhist philosophy. Because of this, facilitators have to move through specific steps. First, regulate the nervous system. Second, relate to establish safety. Only after those two can you reframe to introduce cognitive updates like anatta, and finally route the person to new behaviors. The body absolutely must feel safe before the mind can update its map.
Facilitators actually achieve this initial regulation using something called the droplet protocol. It's this brilliant little micro-protocol. You drop one clear truth into the room, something super simple like, hey, it makes total sense that you're angry right now, and then you just stay completely quiet. That intentional silence lowers the physiological threat in the room. It subtly tells the participant's brain, hey, it's safe to listen. It prevents that intellectual armor from slamming shut, keeping the space wide open for a genuine realization.
And when these philosophical insights, like anatta, are actually grounded safely in the body through that somatic regulation, the transformation is just beautiful. Participants finally move out of that mental prison of rigid self-loathing. They step into a state of radical, trusting openness. They stop paying the endless interest on their past guilt, and they start living as an open, responsive vessel, truly ready to interact authentically with the world.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative question to just sit with. Whether you're in recovery, a facilitator, or just someone fascinated by human nature, is your intellect protecting you, or is it the very armor keeping you trapped in your own mental prison? It's a huge question about our defenses, our egos, and how we truly process vulnerability. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.